Hi, fellow tea lovers. Settle in, because we've got a story. I'm Nell.
And I'm Rose, and today we're bringing you the tea.
Across Eric.
All right. The thing that I've been thinking about this week is naughty music.
Naughty music?
Naughty, I picked it very specifically because we have so many different versions of, oh, that's not supposed to be there, or this is embarrassing, or things, anything that makes us kind of a little bit flustery, maybe a little bit giggly, maybe a little bit upset. It makes you think about things so much more closely when there's sex involved, when there's something like a little bit that you're not sure you're supposed to be doing. For some reason, we just enjoy those things so much more. And so it got me thinking a lot about just the definition of naughty. Because when we were talking about genre, there was a whole lot of discussion about what is and is not appropriate and how that changes.
Mm-hmm.
And every generation gets it. Those young kids are just ruining the insert piece of art type here.
Yep.
Because they're just so naughty about it. And my conjecture for this story is that we are always naughty. We have always been naughty. We will always continue to be naughty in ways that shock the generation before us, and that is just the human condition.
Right.
I did want to talk about the Olympic opening ceremonies, the insane kerfluffle that happened around doing a send-up of the Last Supper.
Oh, I vaguely saw maybe a headline about that.
It's almost the only thing that I heard about it was just immediately, I don't think it's appropriate that they did the Last Supper with drag queens. And so I looked at it a little bit. I hadn't actually watched the thing. And it was a portion of the tableau. They had these really famous performers doing kind of like an aha tableau moment of the Last Supper. And I just laughed so much. I was like, there are so many versions of the Last Supper. There is a Simpsons version. There is a Dogs Playing Poker, except for as the Last Supper. You can buy a velvet painting with LED lights of the Last Supper. It's not this rarefied holy object. We forgot it existed for centuries because it's a fresco for one, so it is actually just a wall decoration. It wasn't even applied correctly apparently at first. That's part of the reason it's so hard to preserve, is when you're doing fresco, there's a point of dryness of the plaster that's ideal for the paint to adhere, but for the plaster to also be a solid building material, it's a real small window. A lot of people don't hit it.
Honestly, I guess I never really thought about the Last Supper painting as religious iconry. I just thought of it as a famous painting. Okay.
Yeah, people use it as a religious icon.
Yeah.
But it's like the classical image of Christ in Renaissance art is mostly based on portraiture of Cesare Borgia.
Yeah, a hot white-looking guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because how do you get the church to pay for your illegitimate children's portraits if you're a pope that has those proclivities? Well, you have them stand in as Christ or as Mary or as St. Catherine. He had all of his kids painted as various icons.
Yes,
having your patron's face in a painting, not unusual.
Yeah.
But that's where we get that image of Christ. It's just art historically speaking. I'm sorry, that's Cesare Borgia. Point being, I thought it was just so appropriate to Paris, particularly, to have something that was a little bit tongue-in-cheek and a little bit, oh, that might be a little bit untoward. It's so very Parisian. It made me think of Rite of Spring, which is one of the most famous ballets. But we tend to think of pieces of art as these holy entities that shouldn't be messed with, touched, moved, breathed on. Depending on the context, that's not wrong, but it's also not realistic. Because art is created as a piece of our emotions, they're being literally scraped off of us and handed off to humanity for interpretation. That was never going to be a clean process.
No, once you create something and send it out into the world, it's not yours.
Yeah, no, we're creating emotions and then we're trying to box them. There were a ton of arguments about the Paris opening that, like, well, this isn't Parisian art. And I was like, this is exactly Parisian art. Paris has always housed radical artists that did things that were wildly outside of normal context to make you think about things. So Rite of Spring is a classic ballet that you'll see any company do interpretations of. It's an Igor Stravinsky ballet that the first reviews were so horrified. It was the exact same language that we saw about the Olympic opening. This is obscene. This isn't art. This is making a mockery of our classical traditions. And it's Rite of Spring. So just a little clip. I think that's a part of it that if anybody has heard a piece of it at all, you've heard that piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's otherwise known as the dinosaur scene from the original Fantasia.
Ah.
Heavy, solid, classical, but by the time you get to classical Disney Fantasia creation, it's considered a piece of the classical pantheon. But when it came out, it was considered the most offensive thing since sliced toast.
How is it offensive?
It used atonality. It used primitive sounds. It used movements that were considered untoward and outside of the dance world. It was so different. It was offensive.
Wild.
Isn't that insane?
Yeah, because I'm like, how are you offended?
It's a primal piece. You know, this is a point where ballets are things like the Nutcracker Suite.
Yeah.
And which are telling a story that is set in an era that people recognize, with clothing that people recognize, with a story that they recognize. And then this comes out and goes, this is the primal feeling of the creation of the earth. And people go, that sounds dirty, I'm not in.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is naughty is so subjective.
Yes.
And it has never had any kind of codified structure or ethic. It's just what somebody else decided to go, about. So when we're talking about naughty music, for me, what always comes up is Carmina Burana. I guarantee that you've heard the song, like hands down, absolutely.
Okay.
And it's funny because it's one that I used to bitch about a lot because it's in all kinds of movies, all kinds of commercials. One of the movements is called O Fortuna.
Okay.
And that's why you're going to recognize it. And it kills me when people don't use at least a complete phrase of the music. It always cuts off in a weird place. I'm like, but why?
We don't know.
And I actually learned semi-recently that it was a licensure issue because it is actually still under copyright.
Oh.
The people that use the whole phrase that makes musical sense are the ones that actually paid to use it. So we're not those people.
Yeah, we're
But that's why I am feeling comfortable with using a half a phrase. But
okay. I definitely know that.
7 seconds of the song, you know.
Yeah.
So that's classical music. That's heavy classical
definitely.
Music. That's what you put when you want to be serious.
Yeah.
People are about to do
Going
things.
to battle.
What would you say if I told you that was based on a bunch of drinking songs?
Okay.
Carmina Burana, it has one of the funniest arcs of music history. It's amazing how things get reused and repurposed. Things that start out as naughty turn into our classical pinnacles.
Right.
So the Carmina Burana was a set of songs that is from 10th, 11th century in Germany, and it was written by students, mostly curia.
Okay.
So students of the church that were learning how to be the legal and administrative arms of the Catholic Church, blowing off steam, sitting around like, hey man, have you heard that one about how much you like to screw in spring? Let's sing it. Like, yeah, dude, sing that one about the spring.
And then we're going to set it to the heavy metal version of classical music.
Oh, we'll get there.
Oh.
This collection of songs, it was mostly in Latin, but it was at a time when the people that were writing it, like scholars, you could assume that Latin was common knowledge.
Okay.
So, or at least in the circles that you're singing these songs in. And they range in topic from fate to love to lust to greed, you know, all the fun stuff. Totus Floreo it's just one of those songs that you could be sitting around the campfire, you know, like strumming your lute and just like Tempus jucundum o virgines, and you're singing in Latin.
Yeah. Sounds fancy.
The actual translation is, this is the time of joy, O maidens, rejoice with them. Oh, I am all a flower. Oh, I'm burning all over with my first love. It is new love of which I am dying.
Ooh.
Sexy times. So Karl Orff used that. He pulled like 24 verses from the book and then reset them into this insane interpretive piece. And
Okay.
so the book itself of the original songs, it was one of the lost books. It was rediscovered in a monastery in 1804.
Nice.
And translated and became just a hit because everybody loves the fun songs.
Right.
I think 45 years later is when Carl Orff becomes aware of it and sets it to the most epic music of all time.
Okay.
But the way that he described the way that it ought to be performed was so funny.
Okay.
The full title is Carmina Burana Cantionis Profanae Cantoribus et Chorus Candidae Commentibus Instrumentus Atque Imaginibus Magicis.
Sounds scientific.
I have definitely butchered at least 2 of those Latin words, but I got made fun of a lot in my master's course because my Latin education was from a classicist. And so I pronounce Latin like a classicist, apparently.
Oh.
I actually had somebody sit down and like do that like hand on the table thing, like, you are a medievalist, stop pronouncing it that way.
Oh.
Because in classical Latin, all of the consonants are hard consonants, so vendi, vidi, vici is actually wendi, weedy, wiki. So when you're seeing a C, you're doing a k noise. When you're seeing a V, you're doing a w, which is not medieval Latin. And that was actually a huge point of contention.
Okay.
But so the translation of that title is Songs of Buren, which is where they were written. Secular songs for singers and choruses to be sung together with instruments and magical images.
Ooh, magical images.
The magical images, this is the stuff of life. You know, I mean, he's being very pithy about it.
Yeah.
What I thought was funny with the Latin translation was that the word profane was in there, because, you know, it stands out, profani. The way that Wikipedia translates that title uses profane as secular. But
oh, that's interesting.
in classic Latin, means before the temple or outside of the temple. So it's like a thing that should be done outside the temple. So I can see where secular kind of glommed out of that.
Yeah, because that is one thing with old texts. The words as we use them now aren't always words as they were used.
Etymology is so interesting there. Because like in medieval Latin, profani means discarding what is holy. So rather than secular just kind of being neutral.
Right, it's very neutral.
It becomes unneutral, opposing of the holy.
Yeah.
And then Carl Orff backs it off again. And like, no, just secular. Went in a circle.
So it's fine.
Well, and the students that were writing these songs in the original texts, they were called Gulliards, who were clergymen, but kind of made their side bread in satirizing the church. So it's a more secular approach to the church that is still giving you your living and writing your laws. It's very bold, it's very out there, it's very naughty.
So, like, if you don't want to go to the main church service, you could go to, like, the church-sponsored comedy club.
Right, like, go hang out with the Gulliards. No, we're actually studying scripture, but have you seen this translation? Oh my god. These guys, they're writing love songs, they're writing sex songs, and they're hiding them away. They're then getting found and elevated to the pinnacle of classical music. I'm not going to say that that's wrong. I think it's interesting. It almost feels like you're sanitizing the past deliberately. And it's not that they changed the words.
No.
Carl Orff set these Latin poems to this epic music. But the thing is, by the time he's writing it, you can't assume Latin knowledge. You can't assume that your audience is going to sit there like, well, yes, I remember my Latin classics. Some of them will.
Not I.
In the 30s, probably a higher percentage, but definitely not 100%. It's the same thing with going to the opera for status and not speaking Italian. You know, you can't assume that knowledge. So when you're putting together a piece, knowing that a lot of your audience isn't going to understand the naughty character of these lyrics, I'm not going to say it's disingenuous, but it is a little sneaky.
Yeah.
It's elevating it beyond the naughtiness that it started with. So what I really love is there's a group called Corvus Corax that is a German metal band. That's why when you said metal, I laughed.
Okay.
And they picked up the Carmina Burana and did an epic metal version of it. What's cool about this group is they use reproduction medieval instruments. And so the instrumentation is actually quite appropriate, but it's still a really big interpretation of this little set of songs.
Who's the metal band?
Corvus Corax. I'm going to play you a little bit of their Tempus Est Jucundum. They've been around for a long time. I'm not sure that the group itself is actually still performing, but members of the group are still performing in a really similar style. They've had like a couple of different sound projects. So this is a little clip from 8 years ago.
Okay.
We will put it on the website. just do that. That to the chorus.
That was mesmerizing.
Wasn't that beautiful? There's nothing you can't do with a bagpipe.
Right?
Yeah, they use smaller Irish pipes, and so that's why it has that beautiful kind of like scream tone to it. It's a lot closer to a medieval pipe system. Like those big bagpipes that you see, like at funerals or the tourist things, those are way later. Yeah, these guys, they use reproduction medieval instruments, and they do a lot of their own writing, but they do a lot of pieces that are very original to their inspiration. But for me, it's funny because it's almost like they blew past the original and took it out of the sanitized Carl Orff. And I'm sorry, I keep talking about Carl Orff like, that's not a pejorative. It's just he turned it into a wider audience palatability.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't think that necessarily does anybody any favors. Like, I think use the original; it's beautiful. But these guys turned it into a full blown, like, crazy, amazing, awesome festival medieval metal vibe, which it's like a bigger, badder, bolder version of.
Yeah, it is.
I think so. You're still getting it to a wider audience, but it's still like, I don't know, it feels more authentic, even though it's really not just a sitting around the fire song anymore. Like, they do big productions.
Yeah.
And it's cool. They actually did an entire Carmina Burana interpretation called Cantus Buranis, which I highly recommend. Just beautiful from start to finish. They're sort of carrying on that tradition.
That's so cool. That's fun. Question and answer time real quick. Who's Carl Orff?
So Carl Orff, it was a composer. The Carmina Burana, his version was written in 1935. So he was a composer and music educator in the 30s through like 50s.
Okay. And that's the one we hear in like more in shows and music today? Or shows, I guess. Shows
and commercials. And
yeah.
It has been elevated to the status to me of Dies Irae, which is a medieval chant that means the wrath of God. And it's part of very old liturgies. It utilizes intervals that were considered evil. Oh. Did you know a tritone could induce you to giving your soul to the devil?
Gracious. Better stay away from that.
But they use it in everything. That one that I always remember first is Star Wars in A New Hope, when Luke comes home and his aunt and uncle are dead. And that dun, 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 that is the Dies Irae.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was written as supposed to make you uncomfortable, and we still use it as supposed to make you uncomfortable. And so like Carl Orff, O Fortuna, it was written to make you feel like bold as brass and inspired to greatness, and we still use it to convey that feeling.
That's so interesting. Music is so interesting.
The Doctrine of Affect, I could go for days.
I just listened to a recent episode of A Mile Higher. They're kind of talking about a particular church and its background, but in some of it they talked about how songs are designed to like make you feel something with the tune. That's so true.
And that's actually a philosophical study that has been around for quite a long time. It is called the Doctrine of Affect.
Okay.
And it is the study of how specific sounds and specific intervals unconsciously affect the human mind and how to write towards that.
Yeah.
And that's something we've thought about as long as we have made music.
Alan Jackson's Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning probably solidified like joining the military for quite a few people when that came out after 9/11.
And it's not even just lyricism. Lyricism is the easy route into somebody's brain, but musicality can create feelings that people don't even realize that they're experiencing because of that song.
That's so interesting. I love that.
So there are so many great examples of naughty music that we could talk about. I'm very sure we'll revisit them as they come up.
Okay.
But the thing that I think is important about this story for me is the circular nature of naughty art.
Okay.
And when I'm talking about art, I'm talking about like the arts, like capital A, music, visual art, theatrical arts. The art, when it's first created, it is almost always something a little bit radical, and that often translates into naughty and into a little bit off the wall, because it's that newness and that originality that makes the art important in the first place. And then because it's important, it lasts, and because people will always try to stick their thumb in, it gets watered down to be more palatable to a wider audience, and then you get a million iterations. And once it's been watered down, it becomes forgotten. It becomes less important because it's less radical and it doesn't make you think, so you don't think about it. and then it's considered lost. And then we rediscover these things in their original form and we think, this was amazing when it was naughty. I'm going to do my version of this. And it just gets picked back up again and turned into something, I think, a little more authentic to its original form.
Mm-hmm.
And we start the cycle all over again. So
I love it.
But so I think a really good example to round this out is K231. When you think about classical music, Mozart is probably your front and center. So K231 is a Mozart composition, otherwise known as Lick My Ass. In German, Lech mich am Arsch.
This sounds like that.
Because Mozart is sort of held up as like the pinnacle of, oh, we've got taste. But Mozart as a person had a great sense of humor and had a dirty sense of humor and was first and foremost a human. Do you remember the movie Amadeus? It's quite old at this point.
Was it like late 90s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a really extreme portrait of...
Yes, it was. I remember.
The seed story was probably very true, that he was probably kind of annoying, that he definitely knew how much influence he had and used it to just flip off the world occasionally, because at that level you can.
That's what celebrities do.
That's what celebrities do. And so this was likely written as like a party song for his friends, because, you know, you're not going and turning on any music. Any music that you have at a party is being generated by your guests or yourself.
That's so true.
It's you want some naughty music thrown on. Well, I just wrote you this amazing song called Lick My Ass. You know, he's just having fun with it. And so when he died, his catalog, when it was sent to the copyists, his wife was the one sending over all the manuscripts, and the copyists, they go, oh, we don't want this to be legacy material.
Yes, we do.
And so they cleaned it right up.
Oh.
They turned it into Let Us Be Glad and sanitized the lyrics within an inch of their life. So the lyrics that were published for a very long time were Let us be glad, growing, droning is the true bane, droning in vain, thus let us be cheerful, merry, and glad.
Okay.
Sounds like your typical 6-part choral harmony.
Yeah.
Meh.
Around the piano.
It's been sanitized out of relevance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so in 1991,
oh, dang.
it gets
we
rediscovered.
know that was last century, but it's still recent for
That's
us.
real new, all right? If I can remember what grade I was in, that's real new. These lyrics get rediscovered. It was a big ruffle in the music history community. There's a great New York Times article about it that we will link.
Okay.
The lyrics were rediscovered in manuscript notes, and the real lyrics are amazing. Kiss my ass, goth, you know the scene too well. Who's making fun of an actor. Lick my ass. I'm not singing it to any correct tune. I think that's an amazing example of that cycle that now that gets played as the best part of Mozart trivia you could possibly get.
Honestly, they should teach that more in school. I know it's more of a high school thing,
right?
But it's more exciting than Mozart, Beethoven, checklist.
Right? Everybody's playing Bach variations and making you learn music theory, when really, if you sprinkled in a little bit of the best stories, it feels more real, and I think it sticks in your mind more.
It does. The best teachers I've had throughout my whole educational life, which is most of my life, have been the ones that had like really interesting tidbits that I'd never learned or hadn't really heard about anywhere else.
That's the problem with shying away from history that has been stuck in a moral corner for whatever reason.
Well, there we go. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thank you for listening.
Share us with your friends. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.